Howdy Grubs, I realized my last review for the Xu20 is pretty long. A lot of people don't want a full deep dive into absolutely everything a system can do. If they did, they'd watch Retro Game Core instead. So I'm going to try this again and keep it short, sweet, and shrimple. Enough yapping though, it's time for more yapping. Let's dig in. The Xu20 V32 is a new handheld from a company called Xu Retro. They're an offshoot of Magic X. At the least, they use the same manufacturer, which is Magic X itself. The Xu20, as I'll be calling it from here out, is a 3.2-inch 4:3 aspect ratio handheld in the vertical Game Boy-like form factor. The coolest thing about it is how different it is from a lot of what we see at this low price point of just $43. For one, it's Android, which at this price point is practically unheard of. Like it says in the title, this is not just a budget Android, it's budget Android that is beginner friendly, which, you know, is kind of impossible, or I thought it was impossible. It does this by running on Aurora Launcher, a fork of the Dawn Launcher, making this look and control very similarly to Linux-based handhelds. Real quick, the order process is what you'd expect with ordering anything from China, but it took 2 weeks to arrive. This sucks, but it's one of the benefits of not getting review copies. I get to tell you what it's like ordering and dealing with the shipping. Honestly, they should just send me free devices so I don't talk about their painfully long shipping process from these Chinese companies. It's not their fault, it's just, you know, side effect of being on the other side of the planet. It was a pretty long 2 weeks for me, and tracking was handled through a third-party app. Not a fan of having to download an app to make another account after having just put in a bunch of info just to order the damn thing. This app would also go days without updating. I really hate ordering from China. If I can use Amazon, I am going to. I don't care if I have to pay extra. Now that it's here, the handheld is pretty good. While it's not as powerful as most Android handhelds using only the all-winner CPU, the same as the Trim UI brick, it does benefit from some key Android features that make it worthwhile when compared to a plain old Linux-based handheld. The big one is likely what we're all thinking, the really good Android sleep function. Linux handhelds, when slept and not being played, will last days, whereas the Xu20's minimum is a week. This makes it a pretty top contender for everyday carry and as a budget noob-friendly option. The reason why the sleep is so important is because the longer it lasts while slept, the less battery it is taking up when it's not being actively used. That's more battery for later on in the day. It's sleeping and not using much battery isn't going to be a problem for you, but like most people, you're probably going to recharge it every single day. But that sleep will not be the reason that your handheld dies. You might be thinking, Android can't be noob-friendly. You just made a video about how it can't be noob-friendly. I did think that until I got the Xu. The Xu runs on a launcher called Aurora. It's basically Android dressed up to look like a Linux-style custom firmware like you'd find on Ambernex handhelds like MuOS. It handles all of the setup with the emulators and files too. It is great. So the only thing you have to do is add your own games and log into Retro Achievements. It's super easy to install too, which is great since Xu Retro lets you save $5 by ordering it without an SD card, which is what I did. Since most of us use our own SD cards anyway, this is a very consumer-aware choice, and I love that they let you do it. If you're new, the SD cards that come with these handhelds suck eggs and ass, and can be slow and prone to failure. I've had 3 brick on me so far. It's just better to buy a new one and learn how to set up these cards now. Eventually, you are going to have to set up a card when using these handhelds, so you may as well learn from the very beginning and then not have to do it again in the future because you actually used a good card this time. Installing was easy though. If you've ever installed a custom firmware like MuOS, it's an identical setup. It takes less than 5 minutes to do, but interrupted with stretches of 15 to 30 minutes because of installations. So make sure you have something to do while you wait. Like maybe pull out your Retro handheld. Oh, you can't do that because it's being used to install it. I don't know, I guess you could play on your PC or something. But shrimply, you put in the SD card, flash it with Rufus, insert it in a handheld, and then you can add your own games. It has an OTG port so you can transfer data over cable, so once it's set up, you never have to worry about launching your spring-loaded SD cards across the room when you go to take them out, because you'll never have to take them out. Adding games works much like it does on Linux handhelds, so it's pretty much exactly the same. This setup and operating system is definitely something that should be used on future Android handhelds as an option, and I think every Android handheld company out there should be offering this as a beginner-friendly option alongside a fully featured version of Android. Either something like Aurora or fully featured Android that has an auto-launching front end for beginners. Something like Steam Deck where it launches into Steam and then you can press a button and go into desktop mode. Like that, where it launches into the front end and then you can press a button to bring yourself into Android proper. The biggest thing thing that kills Android right now is just how many companies just slap Android on there as is and expect new beemals to figure it all out. That was my problem with the Retro Pocket 3. It wasn't beginner friendly, it was beginner hostile. Since it's Android, we have a touchscreen which makes navigation easy. It's oleophobic in 2025, I know, what a bigot. Seriously though, oleophobic is good and it means it's resisting fingerprinting and smudges, but other than that, it's not powerful enough to get the most out of the other Android features, like browsers will be slow, the screen is too short to navigate easily, YouTube struggles, so you're gonna have to just subscribe now instead of doing it on the handheld later. Android apps work, but not ideally. It's more of a neat bonus, but you're going to reach for your phone if you want something like YouTube, listening to music, walkthroughs, stuff like that. Don't get this for Android features, get it for the Game Boy aspect, the sleep, and, you know, hey, if you're in a pinch, maybe it's browser is okay. For power, since it runs on the all-winner chipset, you already know what it can do. It's pretty much the same as the H700 chipset that Ambernic uses in its XX devices, but if you have a Trim UI brick, or you're familiar with them, it's pretty much the same as that. Well, it is the same as that, it's the same chipset. It just has a little bit of extra RAM in order to accommodate the needs of Android. So you have PS1 and prior running perfect. PSP is great but small, and you can play a little Dreamcast and N64, but those last two not working so great is perfectly fine because you don't have an analog stick anyway. If you want to try though, you can press the dedicated analog switcher button to turn the D-pad input into analog input. I would not recommend it though, especially for Dreamcast, as games that use this analog stick are 32-way directional inputs, and D-pad can really only do 8. This makes Sonic Adventure 2 play terribly, which is unfortunate as it's my most replayed game behind Shadow of the Colossus, and it doesn't run too bad on here actually. I still wouldn't play like this, but you know. I don't recommend this for DS. There isn't an issue running it, but if you want a DS, you're going to want a quality and authentic experience. DS people tend to want a 1-1 experience for DS, and that's kind of tough. It costs a lot to make something in the shape of a DS and to research figuring out how to make it, you know, look like a DS and work like a DS and stuff like that. And these companies aren't Nintendo. Thankfully, we are finally getting those options, but this just isn't one of them. You should probably wait and see how the RGDS turns out. If you want Dreamcast or N64, I'd recommend something like the Megami Air X or the Ioneo Pocket Air Mini. I ordered the Ioneo Air Mini, so sub if you want to see videos of that when it arrives. If you want PSP, definitely get the Megami Air X. It's 16:9 and will handle it the best. The controls are perfectly fine, standard for the most part. They're quiet but not silent, but the bumpers are loud, but not in a clicky way. It's kind of hard to describe. I just like how they sound, and since they're bumpers, they're used less, so you probably won't even, you know, wake anyone with it. The membranes on the D-pad are kind of stiff though, and make accidental inputs kind of hard, so you won't hit diagonals without knowing it, but I recommend breaking them in a bit before playing something with a lot of movement. I played through all of Legacy of Goku 1, which is terrible enough on its own, but with a stiff D-pad and a ton of movement, I felt strain in my wrist. Blythe also said that she was feeling pain in her thumb when she was playing a lot of Drill Dozer, I think it was called. I've never experienced that with a handheld before, so give it some time to break in. My opinion is though, if you're going to have no analog sticks, then you should use a floating disc D-pad like on the Cube XX. You might not agree with this, but this is my favorite D-pad on the market right now, and I normally hate disc D-pads. I think the people who like disc D-pads are willing to use non-disc D-pads, but the people who hate disc D-pads will refuse to use disc D-pads. So I think that's why we don't see them so much on handhelds, even though the one on the Cube is pretty good. The other buttons are pretty cool. Power is on the back of the device at the very top left. It does power on by accident sometimes in the pocket. I enabled the lock screen and that prevented it from turning on in my pocket in the future though. This location for the power button is so weird, yet futuristic. I think this is probably the perfect place for it, and it's better than a typical power button, but I think it should be flush with the shell to prevent accidental power presses. The power light is on the back here too, but it doesn't make sense. I can't see the power light from the front, but you'll never turn it fully off, so I guess I don't need to see it. Good thing that you never actually have to fully turn it off because it has a 32-second boot time, longer than any Linux handheld that I've used before. Sleep is thankfully instant and good enough that sleeping all day is acceptable here. Not like real life. I hate society. I wish I could sleep all day. The analog switcher I previously offhandedly mentioned, but it does deserve some attention just for its intelligent design. Usually these devices don't get a dedicated button for this. It's a hotkey, but the switcher is here, its own button. Sits flush, same color as the shell, and even lights up when it's active. It's kind of perfect. But I think everyone is going to prefer analog sticks to a switcher. But if you have to have a switcher, this is what all future ones should look like. The quirky handheld is futuristic in multiple ways. Like, these are obviously concessions that they're making, but they're handled in an intelligent way. That's good, serious design. Seriously good. We don't usually get something like a dedicated button for analog switching because if they're not including analog sticks, they're trying to make it as cheap as possible. Designing and making one of these custom buttons is often more expensive than just adding a stick, which means this is a very deliberate and intentional design. They chose to do this because of what they want the handheld to be. They want it to be a Game Boy and they want it small. I see the work you're doing, Xu Retro, and I appreciate it, even though most of us would still much prefer an analog stick, even if it's one like on your Xu Mini M, where it's smaller and receded into the device. A dedicated switch is only really going to be needed on a mini handheld, which the Xu20 is slightly too big for. But I digress. Leaning into this whole, it's the RG35XX but better that they've got going on, it has Wi-Fi, and if you did that with the 35XX, you'd be paying for the Plus version, which is currently unavailable on Ambernick's site. They're sold out almost. But you'd be paying $59 with shipping, and the Xu20 is $53 with shipping. The Plus also doesn't have a switcher button. The Xu20 screen is a little smaller, but not by a noticeable amount. The bezels are much more noticeable. Just look at those suckers. But this really is the 35XX but better, and it's the 35XX Plus but cheaper. The screen is the only thing I have a gripe about with the Linux versus Android portion of it. The screen doesn't get dark enough that you can play it in the dark without disturbing other people, but also doesn't get bright enough that you can play it in direct sunlight. The form factor is also improved. It's shorter and slightly thicker, but the thickness comes from an improved back shelf, the booty. On the RG35XX, you have a shelf for the triggers and it tapers back down into the device directly below it. The idea being your middle fingers would rest here, but this creates a sharp object to jab into your leg, or creates a awkward bulge in your pants that's sharp and would make the triggers press in your pocket. The Xu20 fixes this design by not tapering the shape, so no more jabbing. You get a normal Game Boy bulge, and the triggers don't get pressed unless your pants are tight. The mono speaker is also in a better place than the 35XX. Aside from the screen, this is a better version of the 35XX in just about every way. It's definitely not perfect though, nothing is. There was a lot of ways that one could improve upon the 35XX. The Xu20's battery life has a pretty average battery life of just 5 to 7 hours when playing games, and that's just okay. I don't think anyone's playing them for more than 5 hours. But it uses a slow charger, and the charging and OTG port are separate ports instead of one combined port. It's a really weird choice, and these charge fast in about an hour or two, but faster is always better. It's just weird to keep releasing devices, you know, this late into the life of the fast charger and not include a fast charger. It's like when people were still using micro USBs just a couple years ago. It has some software quirks that the Xu Retro needs to work on. The launcher can't find games that are in folders. This is a huge mistake to make on anything playing PlayStation games. Most PS1 games come in the form of bin and Q files. This means at the bare minimum, every game will come with one bin and one Q file. So if they're not in a folder, the games list will show both the bin and the Q file. This will make your list artificially longer. Now imagine you're playing Legend of the Dragoon. Now you have 4 discs, which means 8 instances of Dragoon on your list. Now, imagine you're playing one of the PS1 games that happen to have 50 bin files. You can see how this would be a bit of a pain. If a newbie is using this, they aren't going to know about CHDman and CHD files, which do work, and they're not going to know that the device can't read folders. I have a video on how to use CHDman, it's on the end card. So this means before bringing over any PS1 games, you'll need to compress them into CHD files to save on the most space possible, which can be a good thing for smaller files, or a terrible inconvenience of having to deal with an extra step. If someone is downloading ROMs by the set, they're all going to be in folders. Even if they don't have to compress them into CHD, they are going to be in folders, and that means removing them from each of the folders one by one, which means moving over entire sets will be a pain, as they're going to have to one by one remove each game from its folder. I suggest only moving over a few games at a time anyway, but this issue still shouldn't exist. The bezels are massive on this one. It feels like they wanted a larger screen, but due to some sort of error, they couldn't get the one they wanted or use the one that they wanted, so they used this 3.2 inch instead. The total area of this, including the bezels, is 4 inches diagonal, so I definitely think the 3.2 inch was their backup choice. This could have fit a 3.5 inch comfortably. 4 inches would have been too snug probably, so I think they wanted a 3.5 3.5, there was an issue, and then they used the 3.2 instead. But since the shells were already made, they had to add the bezels. If you're someone who panics when their system gets a little bit too warm, this might be a bad fit for you. It gets warm around the vent, never where your fingers are, but it's warm and it's a little scary. But I haven't had any issues with it even on long 4 or 5 hour long play sessions across GBA, PS1, and even with it wheezing through Skies of Arcadia on Dreamcast. There is also no video out as far as I can tell. I recommend this for 3 kinds of moles. The big-handed Papa moles who want to play RPGs one-handed. This is also good for the newbie moles who just want to play a Game Boy again but with all the games on it. Lastly, the Poke moles who want to play Pokemon and its many ROM hacks on a portable system, or just really anyone who wants to test this hobby out but doesn't want to spend a lot and doesn't mind waiting 2 weeks for it to arrive. But the Xu20 would be my new budget recommendation for beginners if it were easier to get a hold of. If you can wait 2 weeks for it to arrive, which is pretty normal, then I can say with my full fuzzy chest, this is the best sub 60 handheld. This is the best beater device. You can bring this anywhere with no regrets. It's technically not a micro handheld, so it's still good for home play. It's smaller than average, slightly, and is pocketable as long as you're not wearing skinny jeans or women's half-pocket pants. And since it's cheap, you probably won't be too worried about giving it a little damage. That's the short review though. If you want to see more detailed info, check out the long review on the end card. I go into a lot more detail. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to tip your mole. I accept likes, subscribes, and bug emojis. Bye!